Good morning, everyone. I think most of you know me. My name is Mary Wells, and I'm privileged to be one of the co-chairs of this very unique and important symposium. And I want to introduce one of my other co-chairs, Ann Millar, who really did a lot of the work for this whole thing in terms of talking to many of the women we wanted to profile, gathering their histories and stories. And the third co-chair is Elvie Dalgaard, right back there. If you can just stand up for a second, Elvie. I'm delighted to welcome you here to participate and share in our first ever Women of Impact Symposium. This symposium is about the celebration and acknowledgement of women who have impacted our profession. It is also an opportunity for us to hear firsthand their own personal stories and to also meet each other. This is the first time I think in my life I've ever been in a room where women outnumber men in a technical conference, so it's a really good feeling. This symposium is a culmination of a year-long project to celebrate many and diverse achievements and contributions of women to the Canadian materials, metallurgy, and mining industries. I hope the inspirational stories of women in this field will provide you with an exciting new perspective of how women in science and engineering have impacted and changed our profession. As we all know, women have progressed considerably in terms of participation in post-secondary education over the past 3 decades. In fact, in 2011, women accounted for 60% of the total undergraduate student population at Canadian universities, and women represent the majority of students at all but 3 universities across Canada. I'm at one of the universities where they aren't in the majority, the University of Waterloo, because we have such a big engineering program. In universities across Canada, for example, women make up 68% of undergraduates in the social sciences and 77% in education. They represent 58% of the medical student body and are at par with men in the law and accounting professions. Today, really the only professions are engineering, computer science, and some branches of the physical sciences such as physics. These are the ones that remain strongholds for men, and we see a significant underrepresentation of women in these fields. For example, just last year, women made up only 19% of students in the Canadian engineering programs. We need to change this. So I had a couple of slides, of course, because I'm an engineer, that I wanted to show you, just to show you a little bit of some of the data we've gathered and to see what the trends have been. So, you know, I just scanned through the news, and I think that we're really in a very timely era in the sense that there's a lot of interest now in getting more women in the technology sector and more women in engineering. So I just looked on, well, Google yesterday and was looking at some of the news articles, and you can see that there's a lot of interest in this area. So I think we're at a point where there's enough interest and enough goodwill from everybody that we can start to make a difference. So, for example, a lot of the engineering deans across the States and a couple in Canada have signed a pledge of diversity. So I think there's 102 schools who have done that. You know, there's a national approach needed to boost women in engineering. You know, Georgia Tech has just teamed with Intel in the high-tech sector to try and boost women and minorities in computer science and engineering. Here's a couple of other words. Again, there's been a lot of interest in the high-tech sector. So Pinterest is the first Silicon Valley company to publicly set concrete goals for diversity. This was another one that wasn't so positive. Women engineers quit over men's attitudes. I thought that was an interesting one. And then again, the business case for getting more women into senior management. And this was in the energy sector. So there's a lot of media attention around this issue, and I think we should kind of take that as an incentive to look at some of these issues. So when you look at the data, I know this is a busy graph, but it sort of starts in 1991 all the way up to just 2014. It shows in Canada the number of engineering students in Canada. So the gray bars, which are the highest, are the total number of engineering students. The little pink bars down below are the females, and then the black line represents the percentages of women that are in engineering across the country. And so you can see very clearly that we haven't really made very much progress at all since 1991. I mean, that's a huge time frame. I graduated in 1987, so we haven't really changed things very much, and there's a variety of reasons for that potentially, but we can see that the numbers of women that are studying engineering are growing, but it's just that men also like to study it quite a bit, so this is something that I think we really do need to look at. When we look at the kinds of engineering women like to do, and there's definitely some forms of engineering that women absolutely love. So it's not that women don't like engineering, it's just they're very selective about the kind of engineering they choose to study. So in the biological and biosystems area, we're pretty much at par, close to 50%. And you can see as we move down the list, Our field, materials and metallurgy, is not too bad, sort of 20 to 25%, but then if you look at mining or mineral, we're down to sort of 15%. At the very, very end are things like software engineering, computer engineering, mechanical. Sort of in the order of 10%. So it's not that women don't like engineering. As I said, they really just are very selective, and they want engineering programs that sort of tie in societal relevance to them and are meaningful to them. And I think that's, they inherently by the name, they start to kind of select from high school what to study. This is just a slide from some North American data, again, showing women in different professions. And again, you can sort of go through the list, but again, making the point that we've already made, that if you look in the professions now, in sort of mining in the geological area, we're looking at 13% participation of women. In the materials, it's more like 16%. So again, although we have higher numbers of women studying these things, it does not translate to the same numbers studying in the profession. And again, as you go down the list, again, you can see, well, nurses is 90% at the very bottom, secretaries, the biological studies, teachers, these are all where it's dominated by some of the women. And this was very interesting, I thought, and this is something I hope we address in the symposium today. If you look at the retention in engineering by gender, this is from some data that was studied over many years and was published in 2010. So on the y-axis, we're looking at percent of engineering graduates working in engineering, and then on the x-axis, we're looking at years since a bachelor degree completion. And so I've divided into sort of early career, mid-career, senior career, and we see, I guess, which is a little bit disturbing, is that both men and women really kind of drop out in the early career. So maybe 65% would go into engineering professions, and by 10 years, we're down to maybe 35% of those people still working, which is disturbing on its own. But then we see, as we get into mid-career and senior career, the drop-off of women compared to men becomes very dramatic and very different. And I'm hoping that is one of the topics we'll explore today and find out why does that start to occur and how can we mitigate it from happening. And on the good news, though, I want to give you a little good news, so it's not all bad news. In Ontario, we've done a lot to work together with our NSERC chair, Catherine, who you'll be hearing from later, to try and develop collaborative programs across Ontario to boost the participation of women in engineering. So this is just a graph of looking at sort of the number of female applications to Ontario engineering programs over the past 10 years. And at least in Ontario, we're seeing some real effect of some of the outreach programs and other programs we're running to get girls exposed to engineering, to find out what engineers do. And so sort of in this admission cycle, our pool of women that were applying was in the order of 23%. And so that's amazing, because when, 10 years ago it was around 16%. And so at my university, University of Waterloo, we're actually seeing record high numbers of women entering first year in the order of 28%. At the University of Toronto, they're seeing 30%. So I think there's some really good news in terms of what's happening right now. And what we need to do now is keep those women studying engineering and then keep them in the profession. And then finally, I just wanted to end my talks with this quote, and then I'll pass it over to Anne. But we all have to remember that change does not occur because we want it to occur or because it is fair for a just society. Change occurs because people engage in the process. So I thank you. I think all of you are engaging in the process today, and I think this is the only way we will really affect change. And that was written by Marilyn McFedrin, who's a Canadian lawyer and human rights activist. So thank you very much. I'll pass it over to Anne now to say a few other opening remarks.
Thank you. Just before I speak, I'd like to thank Mary because she's done such an amazing job organizing this and getting everyone together. So we can just get a round of applause again for Mary quickly. She doesn't like to take thank yous, but she really deserves a big thank you. So as Mary mentioned, we see that the numbers of women in engineering and science in particular areas are still low, and we'd like to increase those numbers and see more participation of women. So the research addressing the reasons behind the gender imbalance in education and career selection is vast and offers a range of explanations. And one of the main reasons identified by these researchers is that we don't have role models for women. So that was really one of the primary goals of this symposium and the larger Women of Impact initiative. The impact of women leaders in the fields of materials, metallurgy, and mining is still largely unrecorded. The Women of Impact Symposium aims to build the individual and collective memories of some of the women in these fields. So we actually profiled 18 women, and we have a number of them here with us today, so you'll see them on 3 separate panels, and we're really excited to share their stories a bit more. We hope the symposium will help pay tribute to the accomplishment of women in materials, metallurgy, and mining, also develop a sense of pride in the achievements of women engineers and scientists, highlight the many inspiring female role models in this community, and also produce recommendations to industry on strategies to increase the advancement and retention of women in these fields. I think Mary has emphasized throughout the organization of the symposium that we'd like it to remain informal and to keep kind of dialogue open and lots of questions. So everyone don't be shy and speak up and interact with the amazing women who have so generously agreed to share their stories and talk to them about their career. And I'll hand it back over to Mary.
Okay, thank you very much. And before we start, can I just see where all the students are, maybe? Okay, so you can see there's a lot of students in the room that are really interested to hear your stories, and you will be role models for them. So thank you for coming. I know you guys are really busy and stuff, so I appreciate you guys coming down. And some of you came very early this morning from far away places, so thank you.